Before we talk about fireplaces, wool cloaks, or giant piles of blankets, we need to understand one simple fact. Medieval winters were cold. Very cold. Not always because the temperatures were lower than today, though sometimes they were, but because people had almost no way to escape the cold once it arrived. Imagine waking up before sunrise on a January morning. The room around you is dark. There is no central heating, no thermostat on the wall, no electric blanket waiting to save the day. The air inside your home feels almost as cold as the air outside. And this is not some special survival challenge. This is just Tuesday. For most medieval people, winter was not a season they enjoyed. It was a season they endured. The medieval world covered a huge area, stretching across different climates and landscapes. A farmer in northern England faced different winters than a merchant in southern Italy. Some places received deep snow. Others dealt with endless rain and damp winds. But almost everyone shared the same problem. Staying warm took work. A lot of work. Today, warmth is easy. You push a button, turn a dial, tap an app on your phone. In the Middle Ages, warmth had to be gathered, built, protected, and constantly maintained. And if you failed, the consequences could be serious. One thing that made medieval winters especially unpleasant was moisture. Modern people often think only about temperature. But anyone who has stood outside on a wet, windy day knows that damp cold can feel worse than dry cold. Many medieval homes were not perfectly sealed from the weather. Rain could sneak through roofs. Wind could find cracks in walls. Floors could become muddy. Clothes could stay damp for days. A wet wool cloak was still useful, but it was not exactly cozy. In some regions, winter storms rolled in from the sea, bringing freezing rain and strong winds. These winds could cut through villages and fields like invisible knives. Even when temperatures stayed above freezing, people could feel chilled to the bone. Then there were the long nights. Winter days were short, sometimes very short. The sun would disappear early, and darkness would settle over the countryside for many hours. Without electric lights, most people spent these long evenings gathered around a fire or finishing small tasks indoors. Once darkness arrived, there was little reason to wander around outside. Unless, of course, your cow escaped. Then suddenly a freezing midnight adventure became part of your schedule. Many medieval people depended on farming, and winter created special problems for farmers. Fields became quiet. Crops stopped growing. Fresh food became harder to find. Everything depended on what had been stored during warmer months. If harvests had been poor, winter became much more dangerous. Food and warmth were closely connected. Your body needs energy to stay warm. If food supplies ran low, people felt the cold more intensely. A hungry person has a harder time staying warm than a well-fed one. So winter was never just about temperature. It was about fuel, food, shelter, clothing, and careful planning. In some periods, things became even worse. Historians often talk about a period called the Little Ice Age. It was not a true ice age like those from prehistoric times. Nobody was building houses next to woolly mammoths. But average temperatures in parts of Europe became cooler. Winters often grew longer and harsher. Rivers sometimes froze. Growing seasons became shorter. Bad weather could damage crops and create shortages. People living through these years did not know they were experiencing a climate shift. They simply knew that winter felt especially miserable. And unfortunately, winter had a habit of arriving every single year. The rich and poor experienced cold differently. A wealthy noble might have servants, larger food stores, and better clothing. A poor farmer had far fewer resources. But even nobles struggled with winter. Large stone buildings could become surprisingly cold. Huge halls were difficult to heat. Drafts slipped through cracks. Stone walls absorbed warmth and seemed determined never to give it back. Money helped, but it did not completely defeat winter. In many ways, cold was one of the great equalizers of medieval life. Everyone had to respect it. Travel became especially difficult during winter months. Roads turned muddy. Snow blocked routes. Frozen rivers created hazards. A journey that might take a few days in summer could become far longer and more dangerous during winter. Many people simply stayed close to home whenever possible. And honestly, who could blame them? If your choices are sit near the fire or walk through freezing mud for 6 hours, the fire starts looking pretty attractive. Winter also affected people's health. Modern medicine was still centuries away. A simple illness could become dangerous. Cold weather placed extra stress on the body. The elderly were especially vulnerable. Young children faced risks too. When fuel supplies ran low, families sometimes had to make difficult choices about how much firewood they could burn. Every log mattered. Every blanket mattered. Every warm meal mattered. Because survival was often built from many small decisions made over many long months. Yet despite all these challenges, medieval people were not helpless. Far from it. They developed clever ways to stay warm. They built homes designed to trap heat. They wore clothing made from excellent natural materials. They created sleeping spaces that held warmth through the night. They relied on fire, food, animals, and community. Over generations, people learned countless tricks for surviving cold weather. And they needed every one of them. Because winter was not an occasional inconvenience. It was a yearly test. A test of preparation. A test of resources. And sometimes a test of pure stubbornness. As we continue our journey through the medieval world, we will discover how ordinary people faced this challenge head-on. Without electricity. Without radiators. Without heated car seats. A tragedy that would surely shock many modern humans. But somehow, year after year, they managed. And it all started with the place they called home. In the next chapter, we'll step inside a medieval house and see how its walls, roof, windows, and design helped families fight back against the cold. Now that we understand just how challenging medieval winters could be, let's step inside a typical medieval home. At first glance, it may not seem very impressive. There are no glowing radiators, no double-glazed windows, no insulation hidden inside the walls, no smart thermostat proudly informing you that the living room is exactly 21 degrees. Instead, you might find a small, dark building sitting beside a muddy path, with smoke drifting from the roof and chickens wandering nearby like they own the place. But appearances can be deceiving. Medieval homes were built by people who understood their environment very well. They knew winter was coming, and they knew survival depended on keeping as much warmth inside as possible. For most ordinary people, home was a simple cottage. The exact design varied from region to region, but many shared similar features. The walls were often made using a method called wattle and daub. This involved weaving thin wooden branches together to create a framework. Then a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung was spread over the frame. It may not sound luxurious. In fact, it sounds suspiciously like someone lost a fight with a pile of dirt. But it worked remarkably well. Once dried, these walls could become surprisingly sturdy and provided decent protection from wind and weather. The walls were often quite thick too. Thicker walls helped slow the movement of heat, keeping precious warmth inside during cold weather. Every bit of trapped heat mattered. The roof was another important part of the battle against winter. Many cottages had thatched roofs made from straw, reeds, or other plant materials. Modern people sometimes imagine thatched roofs as charming decorations for postcards. For medieval villagers, they were much more than that. A thick layer of thatch provided natural insulation. Air became trapped between the layers of material, helping to reduce heat loss. In a strange way, the roof acted like a giant winter hat for the entire house. And just like a good hat, it helped keep warmth where it belonged. One thing visitors from the modern world would notice immediately is how few windows there were. Today we love large windows. We want sunlight, natural lighting. Medieval builders had different priorities. Windows were expensive. Glass was costly and often unavailable to ordinary families. Many cottages had only tiny openings. Some windows were covered with wooden shutters instead of glass. Others used oiled cloth, animal skin, or similar materials. The result was a darker interior. But there was a reason for this. Every window represented a potential escape route for heat. Small windows meant less warmth leaking outside. The house might feel gloomy by modern standards, but it was often warmer. At least warmer than it would have been with giant floor-to-ceiling windows. The floor itself could be another challenge. Many poorer homes simply had dirt floors. Not polished hardwood. Not heated tiles. Just packed earth. These floors were practical and cheap, but they could become cold and damp. To improve comfort, People sometimes spread rushes, straw, or reeds across the floor. This created a layer between their feet and the chilly ground. Of course, these floor coverings needed replacing from time to time. After all, when people, animals, mud, and daily life all share the same space, things can get messy rather quickly. The layout of the house was also designed with warmth in mind. Many cottages consisted of one main room where much of life happened. People cooked there, worked there, talked there, and often slept there. Keeping everyone together had an advantage. Human bodies produce heat. A room with several people inside naturally stayed warmer than an empty one. The family was not just sharing space. They were sharing warmth. In some homes, animals added to this effect. Livestock might be kept in an attached section of the building or nearby structure. We'll talk more about that later, but the heat produced by animals could make a noticeable difference during winter. A cow may not be the most fashionable heating system, but medieval people were practical. If something produced warmth, it was useful. The biggest source of heat inside most homes was the hearth. In early medieval houses, this was often little more than an open fire placed in the center of the room. Smoke drifted upward and escaped through a hole in the roof or through gaps in the building. This meant indoor air could become quite smoky. Your eyes might water. Your clothes might smell like smoke. Actually, your entire existence might smell like smoke. But the fire provided warmth, light, and a place to cook food. Without it, winter life became much harder. Over time, fireplaces and chimneys became more common in some regions. These improvements helped direct smoke outside while keeping heat inside. People appreciated this development. Being warm without feeling like you were sitting inside a giant campfire was considered progress. Stone houses presented a different situation. Many wealthy people lived in larger buildings made from stone. Stone was strong and durable. It resisted fire better than wood. It looked impressive, but stone had a weakness. It absorbed cold. Lots of it. A stone building could feel chilly for long periods, especially during winter. Even if a fire was burning, the walls often seemed determined to remain cold. This is one reason why many grand medieval buildings were not necessarily comfortable. A humble cottage with a good fire could sometimes feel cozier than a large stone hall. Another important feature of medieval homes was their low ceilings. Modern homes often favor large open spaces. Medieval builders usually preferred something smaller. Lower ceilings meant less space that needed heating. Warm air stayed closer to where people actually lived and worked. The room might feel cramped, but it also felt warmer. And warmth usually won the argument. What is perhaps most impressive is that medieval builders achieved all of this using local materials. They used what they had: wood from nearby forests, clay from local soil, straw from harvested fields. Everything came from the surrounding landscape. Their homes were not perfect. They leaked, they smoked, they creaked, and on especially cold nights, they could still be uncomfortable. But these houses were built by generations of people who understood winter very well. Every wall, every roof, every shutter, every design choice reflected centuries of experience. Because when winter winds arrived and darkness settled over the countryside, a good house was far more than shelter. It was protection. It was security. It was survival. And at the center of nearly every medieval home stood one thing that mattered more than any wall or roof: the fire. In the next chapter, we'll gather around the hearth and discover why keeping a medieval fire alive was one of the most important jobs in everyday life.